Hello, everyone, and welcome to Scream Scene, the horror movie podcast where we watch every horror movie ever made in chronological order, and then we rank them from best to worst. My name's Ben.
And I'm Sarah.
Thank you for listening to us today. How are you doing today, Sarah?
Doing all right. Got all of our errands done. Finished up some Christmas shopping. I believe we still have 2 gifts, at least on my list, that I still need to get, but otherwise I think I'm pretty good. How was your day?
My day was all right. I have, I think, 1 gift left to get on my list for Christmas. And yeah, today was kind of a quiet day, I suppose. While you were out doing the errands, I was out learning about this week's movie.
What is this week's movie?
This week's movie, Sarah, is WOMANEATER from 1958, directed by Charles Saunders.
Perhaps a not so direct inspiration for Nelly Furtado's Man-Eater song?
No, I think the inspiration for Nelly Furtado's Man-Eater song is the concept of a man-eater. But I will say that the WOMANEATER of this film is not the good kind.
DJ Khaled, he's up with this monster, eh? I feel like that was pre-pandemic that he talked about.
Oh yeah,
that.
that's an old
that's
reference
old.
at this point. So this film comes to us courtesy of producer Guido Cohen and director Charles Saunders, who were the team who had previously brought us The Man Without a Body, which we covered in episode 211. And that movie did not impress us.
It really didn't. You'd think a movie about a beheaded Nostradamus in the current day would be more interesting.
And yet. So Guido Cohen, the producer of this movie, was born in Italy in 1915, and he got his start in the British film industry as a subtitler. And by the 1950s, he was producing his own films in partnership with Charles Saunders. Saunders didn't actually direct The Man Without a Body. That was W. Lee Wilder. But listeners will remember that Saunders' name was on the film in order to secure funding for the movie. Mm-hmm. Saunders was born in London in 1904, and he entered the film industry in the 1930s during the quote-a-quickie era, when you just needed to have product to put out there, beginning with a romantic comedy called No Exit, which he wrote, directed, and produced. However, he spent the majority of the 1930s and 40s doing things other than making his own movies. He worked as an art director, an editor, and a second unit director before becoming a director again in the late 1940s and spending the 1950s directing low-budget movies as well as episodes of television. By the late 1950s, he was firmly in the B-movie sphere. So we have this film, which is a genre picture. He also did a lot of crime thrillers, but his other movie of 1958 was Nudist Paradise.
Ooh. Exploitation?
Yeah, exploitation movie. It's basically exactly what it sounds like. This guy falls in
documentary about a nudist colony?
It's not a documentary, but it's also it's this guy falls in love with this woman who he finds out is part of a nudist colony. That's it. It was highly financially successful.
Yeah, where else are you going to see TNA?
Exactly. Saunders would retire in 1962 after the crime thriller Danger by My Side, and he would pass away in 1997 at age 93. So like The Man Without a Body, this film stars George Coulouris, the English stage actor best remembered for his time in Orson Welles' Mercury Theatre Company, where he played Mark Antony in their famous version of Julius Caesar, and Walter Parks Thatcher in Welles' debut film Citizen Kane. After 2 decades in Hollywood, he had returned to Britain in the 1950s, continuing on stage and on film, with a return to roles in higher-profile movies in the 1970s, before his death in 1989 at age 85. Actress Marpessa Dawn appears in a small role in this film as a native sacrifice girl.
Oh, no.
A year before she won the role of Eurydice in Marcel Camus's famous film Black Orpheus.
Wait, so if she is a sacrifice in this movie, then it's... Oh, okay. I was hoping for, like, I don't know, a lady killing... Like a lady monster killing ladies. This sounds more like only ladies who are virgins can be sacrificed to the eater of women.
Yes. So the woman-eater of the title is a flesh-eating tree.
Haven't we already seen something like that? What was that?
That was
Paul
From
Blaisdell?
Hell It Came.
Yes, yes.
Which had a Paul Blaisdell walking tree monster.
Yeah.
Yes.
But didn't necessarily eat flesh.
Or women exclusively either. No, this is a flesh-eating tree. And I believe the mad scientist of this movie needs to feed women to it in order to produce a sap that brings immortality.
Okay.
We'll find out when we watch the movie. Marpessa Dawn was like a really beautiful African-American Filipino model who like was a cover model for Ebony and stuff like that in the 1950s. And yeah, small role here, but film buffs will know her from Black Orpheus. The female lead is played by Vera Day, a 23-year-old blonde bombshell who dropped out of school to begin modeling at age 15 and began appearing on stage as a showgirl at age 19. She started acting in films the following year, and we saw her in Quatermass 2. She was the, like, young girl at the tavern.
Oh, yeah, who almost dies or something, right?
That's right. Another famous beauty featured in this movie is Sarah Layton, who was 21 years old when she appeared here. So Sarah Layton had a short stint as an actress at the start of, when she was young, but eventually she achieved success, recognition, and fame in her chosen field, which was portrait painting. While she was, renowned for her whole life for her beauty, she became highly sought after by the rich and powerful, for her to paint their portraits. These subjects included the Queen Mother, Lord Olivier, the Prince of Wales, the Princess Royal, Gloria Swanson, Sir Roger Moore, the Lords Beaverbrook, David Niven, etc., etc.
That's really cool.
I guess she didn't like sort of traditional like sittings for portraits. So for the Queen Mother, she just like got permission to like follow her around with a sketchbook for like several days before producing her portrait.
That's cool.
So, as you may have been able to intuit, this is a very cheap film.
Yes.
And it had even more than its fair share of difficulties because they were shooting at Twickenham Studios with a little bit of like location shooting in London. And so they built, everything out in Twickenham. And just before shooting began, a fire broke out at Twickenham. And the flesh-eating tree that is the woman-eater of the title was destroyed in the fire, leaving...
Wrap it up, boys. We defeated it. If only we had the cameras rolling at the same time.
So the prop department had 2 days to make a replacement, which was largely considered unsatisfactory by all involved, but the movie's low budget and tight schedule just wouldn't allow for anything else. So, Woman-Eater was released in April of 1958 by Eros Films on a double bill with Blonde in Bondage.
Oh my God. Amazing.
It was given an X rating by the BBFC. However, in the US, it was released in July of 1959 by Columbia Pictures on a double bill with Ishiro Honda's The H-Man and advertised as a kids' matinee movie.
So, what's the over-under of this actually being horror?
Well, contemporary reviews were largely negative, Modern reviews are more mixed, with some critics giving the movie praise for doing what it could with few resources. But modern critics also draw attention to the exploitative nature of the premise, the way that there are, like, I guess, POV shots from the POV of the tree as, like, screaming women are being fed to it.
Oh my God.
With some critics going so far as to declare this to be a highly misogynist film. One critic, like, was quoted as saying it's the most misogynist film they've ever seen, which, to be honest, like, I think you need to, like, well, maybe not. I was about to say you need to see more films, but
I can guarantee there are way more misogynist movies than WOMANEATER from 1958. But that is not to say that this movie is not going to be misogynist.
Well, it was released on DVD by Image Entertainment in 2000. So if you do want to figure out where it stands on the list of most to least misogynist films of all time, you can watch along by finding a copy of that DVD.
You're going to hear a brief musical interlude, and when we come back, we will discuss WOMANEATER from 1958, directed by Charles Saunders.
See you on the other side, everybody.
Welcome back to Scream Scene. We just finished watching WOMANEATER from 1958, directed by Charles Saunders. Ben, first thoughts?
This is a very mean-spirited movie.
Yes. Asterisk. I find a lot of, like, British media inadvertently is mean-spirited.
Fair observation.
Yeah. Speaking very, very generally.
Yeah, in a very broad sense.
Yeah. It's not the worst.
No.
But it's also, like, overwhelmingly mediocre.
Yeah, it's not bad enough to be truly bad.
Yeah.
But it's not good enough to be interesting either. It's just trash.
Yeah. But let me dig into the plot synopsis so anyone who had the pleasure of not watching this movie will also be brought up to speed with how mediocre this movie is.
Mm-hmm.
So we start off following a Dr. Moran. He is planning an expedition to the Amazon jungle because he's heard of a tribe there that seems to have the ability to bring back the dead. He wants to go see it for himself. He's also a scientist. He gets there, and he sees a secret ceremony of this tribe where this woman is in a trance through the drums and then gets sacrificed to a carnivorous tree. Now, Dr. Moran has some jungle fever, so he's brought back to England. 5 years later, we're in England, and it appears that Dr. Moran has brought either the singular tree or one of the trees to Britain, as well as a tribe member named Tonga, and they have been sacrificing local British women to the tree in order to get its sap, and then from that sap, make a serum that will bring back the dead.
This seems like a zero-sum game to me, but I'll get into that later.
So we see them sacrifice this young girl, get the sap, make the serum, and inject it into a heart. And the heart does start beating, but only for like 5 minutes. It's a very short amount of time. Now, there is a police investigation into the disappearance of a tourist. Her name was Susan, and we are shown a glamour shot of her, and she's the girl that we saw being sacrificed to this tree. So the police are investigating, but they're not like bumbling in the sense of like, here's comedic relief, but definitely seem to not be asking enough questions.
Well, you know, they come to a rich old white guy's house and they're like, hey, have you seen this disappeared girl? And he says no. And they go, cool, you're rich and old and white. We'll take your word for it. That's sort of what's going on here.
Yeah. There's a nearby fair, like little carnival fair going on, and we see this sideshow stand that features a woman named Sally Norton doing a hula dance, despite being the blondest, whitest girl you've ever seen. And she happens to meet local Jack Venner. Jack owns a local, garage. He's like, do you want to come back to my garage? And I'm like, but it's his place of work. It's not just like a garage he has. Or, sorry, we're in the UK.
Garage.
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 He's like, come back to my garage. Now, Jack is talking Sally up when she's supposed to be working. Her boss comes over to be like, what the fuck? Get back to work. And Jack socks the boss in the jaw, leading to Sally being fired. So the next morning, she walks over to the garage and is like, hey, you're the only person I know in this town, and I got fired. Any tips for work?
Yeah, because she was working for a traveling fair, right? So if you work a job like that and you're fired, you're just stuck in whatever town they were in, right?
And Jack goes, well, there is the old rich white guy, Dr. Moran. He has an old housekeeper, and maybe he's looking for some extra help around the house to help his old housekeeper. So she's like, great. So she goes, and the current housekeeper, her name is Margaret. By old, I would say she's middle-aged.
Mm-hmm.
And despite her objections to Dr. Moran about I can keep up with the housework, what's the deal here? Moran hires Sally. Next, we see Moran is on the lookout for another victim. And he's like, no, Tenga, it's not going to be Sally. I'm going to go to London and pick up a girl from Piccadilly Circus. So Moran heads out and brings back a woman named Judy. We see her get fed to the tree and how much Tenga just loves feeding this tree. And now Margaret, she sees that Moran leaves and comes back with a girl, and she's getting awfully jealous, so she confronts him, asking where do you go at night? Where you leave me here at home? And Moran's like, Margaret, you're my housekeeper? But apparently they did have a thing way back, but that stopped 5 years ago, and he's made it clear I'm not interested anymore. But she keeps at it. But anyway, so she's super jealous that Sally is here now, because Sally is blonde and perky.
Mm-hmm.
So Dr. Moran that night is like, no, Marge, we're done. This is not happening. Get it into your head. She pulls out a knife and goes to stab him, and he turns around, stops her, and strangles her, and she's dead. Now, concurrently to all of this, Sally and Jack have been seeing each other because it's been about 2 weeks, and they're engaged. The morning after the night that Marge is murdered, Sally is planning to leave. She's like, I'm done with this. She just thinks Margaret is sick in bed, but she's like, I've had enough of this house and I'm getting married. I'm quitting. I want to leave. But Dr. Moran won't accept her resignation because I love you, Sally. You can't leave me.
Turns out, I guess Marge was right the whole time.
Yeah, even though there was no inclination from Dr. Moran at all.
Mm-hmm.
Unless maybe, if I ignore the girl, then she'll fall in love with me. Maybe that's what he was thinking. Anyways, so he's like, no, don't you want to know what my experiment is? You can share in the glory with me. And she's like, no, I don't like this. And he's like, too bad, and takes her down into the basement. Now, Jack knew that Sally was planning on leaving in the morning, and she was going to come down to his garage, and she's not there. So he's getting suspicious. He heads up to the mansion, and Dr. Moran's like, yeah, no, Sally left this morning. I don't know. I haven't seen her. And Jack's like, suspicious, and goes to the cops. The cops, meanwhile, are headed over to Moran's because they found some evidence about Susan, that first girl, first that we see, that connects her to being near the Moran estate the night she went missing. So they're headed there. Meanwhile, Moran shows Sally the basement, the tree, Tenga, all of that stuff. And Tenga's like, oh, a pretty girl down here, and starts beating the drums. And then is disappointed when Dr. Moran's like, no, she's not for tree. She's for another kind of wood, Tenga. And Tenga's all disappointed because he just likes to murder. Sally gets to watch as Dr. Moran takes the serum out into a syringe and jabs this cadaver covered with a sheet. And you might be thinking, where did he get a dead body? Surprise! Turns out this is Marge's dead body. She comes back to life, but she is basically a zombie. She has no brain. And when Moran realizes this, he turns to Tenga and says, you cheated me, you and your tribe. I was supposed to be able to, bring her back fully. And Tenga laughs and says, no, the brain is for us only.
I did cheat you.
Yeah,
yes.
What you gonna do about it, dude? Meanwhile, Margaret goes to try to, strangle Sally, and then she expires because the serum only works for, 5 minutes. As Moran is examining Marge's body, Tenga grabs Sally roughly enough to tear her shirt, and tries to take her to the tree. Moran stops him and they're struggling. Just as Jack arrives into the house with the police search upstairs and Jack heads to the basement, grabs Sally and gets the fuck out of there. Moran and Tenga continue to struggle, eventually leading to Moran lighting the tree on fire by throwing some chemicals on it. And then as he tries to escape, Tenga throws a knife into his back and then goes and sits and prays at the burning tree. And that's the end.
Mm-hmm. So you did a very good job with the synopsis there, Sarah, by essentially smoothing over a lot of this movie's rough patches.
Yeah.
Do we want to talk about all of the plot holes first, or do we want to talk about the misogyny first?
Let's talk about the misogyny first.
Okay.
So, for example, so the most obvious examples of misogyny are towards Sally, but there's a fair share lobbed towards Marge as well.
Yeah, no one who's a woman gets treated well in this movie.
But I think to point to a specific scene to kind of exemplify the movie, Sally is at Jack's garage and she's like, hey, I'm here for my date, that we're going on. And he's like, oh, sweet. Let me just finish up this car. I know you know nothing about cars because you're a woman, but can you try to maybe pass me this wire? And pass me the pliers? No, they're over there. No, bitch, they're right fucking in front of you. Pass me the fucking pliers. Can't you do anything right? Okay, now hold the light so I can see what I'm doing. Not into my eyes, you bitch. Lower it. Oh, now I can see your breasts. That's great. Perfect. Hold it right there. Not into my eyes. Come on. And then she storms off. And this is the scene where they get engaged, by the way.
Yeah.
As he's doing this shit.
Yeah, midway through berating. Now, to be fair, listener, Sarah's exaggerating slightly so that you can get the idea. Because, of course, these are British people in the 1950s. So
yeah, if they're going to say bitch, it's going to be towards a female dog. Oh, that bitch looks like she's for good breeding.
The point is that the tone is about right. He is constantly berating her for being a stupid woman. And then midway through that berating, he's like, so why don't we get married? The thing is, so Dr. Moran is also an asshole.
Yeah.
He calls Margaret stupid a bunch for very little reason. He treats Sally poorly. I mean, he murders women, obviously. It's a bad sign when your hero and your villain are equally awful to the main female character. And the reason we're supposed to side with the hero, in quotes, because it's not like he does much in the way of heroics.
He gets her out of there.
Yeah, he walks down some stairs and helps her up them back again. He's young and handsome, and he doesn't murder people. But Jack's an asshole.
Absolutely.
And this movie has just a really poor vibe towards women, I guess you could say. And it's every interaction.
Mm-hmm. Because it's just the culture, it seems. And I don't mean British culture. I mean just the culture when you're embedded into a culture where this is just how you speak to women, you're not really aware of like how frequently you refer to them in these ways.
It's weird, right? Because the movie doesn't really play the way Jack treats Sally as wrong.
Exactly.
She does get like upset with him and like storm off, and then like
comes back and says, well, I guess if we get married,
you'll just have to teach me about cars.
Yeah.
Or whatever, right? Yeah.
So it's like as if it's trying to be some bantery stuff, but it goes too far.
Yeah, it's trying to be bantery stuff, but like there isn't enough. Well, I mean, the problem is that the relationship between Jack and Sally is like fucked from day one, right? Because his whole thing is like, oh, I spotted a hot chick dancing at the like come see the hot chick dancing stand at the carnival. I'm gonna like distract her away from her work, declare that I'm in love with her, which, you know, as a hot chick who dances for a living is not exactly like a unique or interesting thing for her to hear. And then when her boss comes over to be like, hey, you're supposed to be working, I'm going to deck him in the face because how dare he talk to you. And then when that gets you fired, surprise, surprise, you're going to have to be stuck with me in this like town. If you are someone who thinks like that's a great plan for getting with a girl, you're an asshole. And then, like, from every moment on, he's just, like, a jerk to her about everything. Mm-hmm. The scene where she comes to his garage at the start and she's like, oh, I lost my job and I have nowhere to go because of you. And he's like, oh, that's great. That means that there'll be no one for you to talk to except for me and you'll have to fall in love with me. Like, he literally basically says that, right?
Yeah, he literally says, then I have no competition.
Yeah, while she's, like, stuck out here in the middle of nowhere. Like, yeah, everyone is really bad to women in this movie. It makes it hard to watch. The movie is only an hour and 10 minutes, which makes it easier. But yeah, man.
Yeah.
It's rough.
Onto the plot holes.
Yeah, the script was written as if it's on like autopilot, and that works if you're like watching it on autopilot, because I think you can kind of fill in most of the blanks yourself if you've seen enough of these kinds of movies. But if you're actually paying attention, there's just like a lot of missing pieces.
Yeah. Like, what is Dr. Moran's motivation beyond I'm a scientist, therefore bring back dead?
Yeah. So
I thought he was going to have like a long dead wife or something.
But yeah, it's Margaret who he brings back, who he just killed yesterday.
Yeah, which I mean, like, to be fair, that is a better person to bring back to life than a whole new character who was like this frozen chick in the basement.
But like, the other thing is, I mean, he seems to be motivated just solely by like glory, right? But what we sort of learn is that like he's had to be killing women for like 5 years to feed the tree enough to produce enough serum to animate Margaret for 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. So like his whole thing where he's like, oh, you know, all of this murder is justified because once I can come up with the serum, like I can bring people back to life. Right. But okay, if you have to kill a person to bring another person back to life, that's a zero-sum game. Yeah. Ultimately, like, are you actually ahead of the game in any way, right?
Also, the cops are so bad if women have been disappearing
for 5 years and they've only just noticed it.
Like, let's say it's like one girl a month.
Right.
That's a lot of women.
It might be because potentially if he's been grabbing all the other women from like London and bringing them back, it's like, oh, that's a missing woman in a major metropolis and we never connected it to this weird kook who like lives, you know, an hour's drive out of town. And they noticed it with Susan because she was like a girl on holiday who like happened to be walking through his grounds and he was like, convenient, and like bonked her on the head and brought her in, right?
But like when we see him stalking Judy in Piccadilly Circus, there's a sex worker who approaches him and he keeps walking. So it's not like he's choosing anyone.
It's hard to understand like what his criteria is.
Yeah, because like, listen, we're in the 50s. I can understand the police being shit at investigating missing sex workers because that's kind of how it is today. Mm-hmm. But Judy seems to have like, there are multiple witnesses to see Moran with her.
Sure.
Like, I don't know. It's just odd. And if this is how he's picking his victims, like, someone would have seen something over the course of 5 years.
Yeah, the 5 years thing is weird, but, like, the weirdest part of it is, so he goes to the Amazon and he sees this ceremony, and then he kind of, like, passes out, and then there's a scene where they wake him up back at, like, camp, and it's like, yeah, he was mumbling something about trees and sacrifices, but he's got the jungle fever. And then we just cut to, like, he's back at his house and he got the tree and Tonga with him from the Amazon. We don't see how that happens.
Yeah,
like,
we just get the, like, 5 years later.
Yeah, like, he says that, oh, your people cheated me. But there's no scene where, like, we see him go and, like, make a deal with the people to take the tree or take, like, a cutting of the tree or, yeah.
And, like, this tribe is shown worshiping this tree. He says this tree is this tribe's idol.
Right.
So if there's only one tree, I can't really imagine him being able to take it nicely. And if there are saplings, I still, like, I'm like, I don't see how this works.
He's also just, like, got Tonga with him. And there's, like, no explanation. Like, it just cuts to, like, Tonga's in his basement playing the drums while he sacrifices a girl to the tree. This is one of those things, like I said, where, like, you can kind of, like, connect the dots in your head, but it's a little bit disarming watching the movie. Other, like, weird holes in the story are Sally's got, like, a bunch of scenes where she comes to Jack over the course of the movie where she's like, something's not right about that guy, and that house gives me the creeps, and, like, I'm getting out of there, which are, like, very standard scenes, but we don't get any scenes of her, like, doing anything in the house.
Yeah.
Like, there's no scene of her, like, settling in and, like, oh, there's eyes watching me from the painting or bumps in the night or anything. Like, she comes and she gets the job, and then she has another scene where she quits the job, and there's nothing in between.
And even Marge is like, yeah, something's weird in this house, but I stay because I love you. There's nothing, like, I can understand Marge being a little more weirded out by the house because she's been here longer. Mm-hmm. And so she's been able to see that, like, there's weird things afoot behind this iron door, behind these curtains. There's not even a secret passage, Ben. It's just behind some curtains.
Okay, here's the thing. As an audience member who has seen these kinds of movies many, many times, when Sally goes up to the house and is like, hey, I'm a sexy young woman. Do you have any openings for sexy young women at your murder mansion? And the doc's like, yes, absolutely. As an audience member, the obvious thing here is like, oh, she's going to be his next victim. She just walked into his web because he's clearly, you know, hunting down sexy young women to sacrifice for the tree. Yet that thought doesn't seem to cross the doctor's mind because even with Sally living in the house with him, he still drives out to London to go track down Judy all night.
Yeah.
Which is really weird.
And so it's like when she comes in, he first turns her down and then goes, no, you know what? I will hire you. And it's like that thought has occurred to him that she will be the next victim. But then it just turns out he loves her. And there's nothing in the script, nothing in his performance that shows that he's, like, interested in her. No. Beyond being, like, the normal level of, like, man being creepy to sexy lady in a 1950s movie. Yeah,
like, he's an old man and she's, like, a hot blonde chick in sweaters that are too tight and in, like, cone bras.
Yeah. But good posture, though.
Right. But, like, yeah, there's nothing that, like, indicates anything more than the normal amount of gawking, basically. It's not like Jack, who, like, immediately is like, I love you, Sally.
Yeah.
You know? And
absolutely.
so when his declaration of love comes out of nowhere after he's already killed Margaret, like, it's like, did you get this idea from Margaret? Were you like, actually, now that you're lying dead on the cold floor, you might have had something there. Maybe I am in love with Sally. But, like, she's not getting the heebie-jeebies from anywhere. It's just because, like, she knows what movie she's in. Like, she's read the script. And then he's saying to her, I'm sure you must have wondered what's behind the mysterious curtains. But, like, there hasn't been the standard scene where, like, maybe she's cleaning in his office and, like, pulls the curtain back and sees the door and goes, oh, doctor, what's up with these iron doors? And he's like, stay away from those. Like, that never happens.
Yeah.
It's like, as I said, the movie was written on autopilot and just sort of is going like, oh yeah, we must have done a scene like that because these sorts of movies always have scenes like that without actually
doing the scene.
Yeah. And then the ending is just kind of nothing. Like, okay, the movie just feels really guilty of going through the motions. Like the story's just kind of happening without regard to like setting things up, which gives it a very and then feeling of storytelling, like as if it's getting made up as we go.
Yes, but it knows when it's time to end the movie. Like it ends like a Universal movie.
Yes.
So I have to give it credit for at least that.
The tree goes up in flames and the movie is over. Yeah, we don't cut back to Jack and Sally. I will say that the movie makers definitely seem to have understood quite well that the appeal of WOMANEATER was the women, because they are all gorgeous eye candy, and the movie absolutely knows that that's what we're here for, basically.
Yes, I would definitely put this in the exploitation genre. It might not be as fully an exploitation film as, what was that one? Blondes in Bars or something?
Blonde in Bondage.
Yeah. But it definitely makes sense as a double feature, and it's not a surprise that it's leaning into exploitation when it's also being a horror movie. The point of view shots of the girls coming towards the camera as they were being forced towards the tree, I liked those because it was that blending of horror and exploitation, and it worked well.
Yeah, honestly, like the movie would have been better if more of its limited runtime was taken up with seeing this tree, which basically, listener, the tree is like if there's a guy in a tree costume but like non-mobile, and he's got his like arms in like the branches and is kind of just moving them around.
And the branches are kind of vine-like.
Yeah.
They have that kind of fluidity. It does have like multiple appendages that are moving, and it looked like either there were two eye stalks or like they were like crab thingies, kind of like up by, they were closer together there. But it also could have just been more appendages.
It didn't really have like the recognizable face of a Paul Blaisdell carnivorous tree.
And I kind of wanted it to have a giant mouth.
Right.
Yeah,
because it's eating the women, but we don't actually see like an orifice for it to be sticking them into. You know what I mean? I think that the movie would have been better if more of its screen time was tree eating women and like less of it was like watching like men be jerks.
Yeah.
Because like, I think the reason why there isn't more tree eating women is because the filmmakers were sort of aware of how bad and unconvincing the tree looked. And also because like, in 1958, people probably like weren't really ready for like, let's watch this woman writhe around wrapped up in vines getting eaten by a tree yet.
We definitely get that, but during a fade to black.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, we'll tease you.
Yeah, they don't linger on it.
The other interesting thing with this film that I can't tell if it's on purpose, just the quality of the film that we watched, or both. But there were times where they were doing a warped effect. The first time you see it is when we were looking at the Amazonian woman when she's being entranced by the drums. And so you think, oh, well, that's kind of neat to show that she's in a trance and stuff. And then as the movie goes on, there are random warps and warbles and strange cuts.
Yeah, there's times where it seems like the tripod isn't locked off, so when they try to like do a pan or a tilt, everything goes all over the place.
So it makes for some like really unique and interesting edits.
Yes.
But there's no purpose behind them. So you're like, okay, that must be a mistake or something with like how old this movie is. There are times where the warbles, I don't know, is there like a technical term?
Sure.
Okay. When that happens on a character, when there's like no need for it, like they aren't in a trance, they aren't like in a crazed state, it just is happening.
It was really hard to tell if it was something inherent to the movie or just the copy we were watching. It kind of, to me, looked a little bit like basically an artifact of a bad telecine. So like if you had warps in the film from like, the film just being in bad shape, like it was too hot or something, or it wasn't secured in the gate properly. So as it's being put through the telecine, like the actual film itself is wavering and warping as it's being recorded by the video camera.
The telecine is what kind of lines it up with the lens, or?
The telecine is literally the process of like cinema to television. So if you're watching like a video of a film, like obviously you're not watching the film. So before digital scanning, what it was you literally just like ran the film through essentially a projector and then just sort of pointed a video camera like at the projector as the film ran through. So if the film had warping in it, or, you know, just like wasn't secure in the gate, so it was kind of wavering as it went down through the gate, you might have that kind of wavering of the image. But there's stuff that looks like it can't be that. Like it really looks like as if like the camera operator is drunk, or like...
And there were times where like the cuts would be like the camera is about to drop and kind of like quickly like spins down left, and then it cuts to like a swing up right to a different scene or a different shot.
It's like as if like when they finished a scene, the camera operator just like let go of the camera, and it just sort of, you know, with the tripod not being fully locked off, like just sort of like swung down to point at the ground. And then when they started the next scene, he just sort of swung it back up again, and someone decided not to cut that out of the film or something. It's weird.
But it's really interesting. So if you are someone who is interested in like experimental film, or the way that film will experiment with cuts, this might be an interesting movie to watch.
Yeah, assuming that it wasn't just like some weird artifact of the version we happened to be watching, right?
Fair.
I will say that this is a better movie than Man Without a Body.
Yes. This isn't one of the worst films we've seen, both in terms of like horror and its misogyny. But like I said at the top, it just feels mediocre. The Man Without a Body, or sorry, the head?
Yeah, Man Without a Body.
He
has a head. That's all he has.
The Man Without a Body had such a unique premise and then was so boring
Yeah,
for everything else. It was like worse than mediocre.
I thought Vera Day, who plays Sally, was likable in her way.
Yeah, she isn't bringing much to the movie. I feel like she's like naturally just like nice.
Yeah.
She's not really enhancing the role in any sort of way.
No, she's just like got some natural charisma, which like puts her above
a lot of
the other
protagonists.
People. Yeah. George Coulouris is clearly like struggling to make this script work.
Yeah, I think, you know, he's trying to deliver lines like there's more oomph and pizzazz, not in a campy way, for the record.
No, he's trying to act in such a way that maybe his performance might like smooth over the rough patches in the script, is kind of the feeling.
But he's no David Carradine. You know, he's no, I don't know, Bela Lugosi.
Or even a George Zucco.
Yeah. So it doesn't quite work. But, you know, commend the effort.
It's amazing that they got an hour and 10 minutes out of how much story there is here. Because the thing is like, you know, when you put it all together and do a synopsis like Sarah did, like not a lot happens in this movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have one scene and then we're on the plane to the Amazon. And I was like, that's really fast. Like they know they have like another hour to do
Well, yeah,
things, right?
It's almost bizarre how fast like the start of the movie is. It's like, and we're on the plane to the Amazon, and then we're seeing that ritual, and then he's got jungle fever, and now we're back in England 5 years later, and he's got the tree and Tonga. And you're like, you could have explained some of that.
That could have been a whole movie.
Right. And instead, we just get like the next 60 minutes after that of like, well, need to find some girls to feed to this tree, I guess.
The eternal pursuit. The cops, like I said, they aren't the worst. They just... ineffective.
Yeah.
And they're not comic relief, which is like always a concern with British movies, it seems.
Sure.
I trace it back to James Whale.
Yes.
So, The Man Without a Body, which is what these people worked on before this, and the previous Death Tree movie From Hell It Came are both on the miscellaneous list.
They both didn't manage to rank. Wow.
So do we want to talk about whether this is horror or not? And then if so, to move on to ranking?
I think this is horror. I just think it's bad.
I agree. It has all of the tropes of the time frame of like mad scientist and, death.
Secluded mansion, weird dungeon basement, experiments that okay, let's stop for a second. Here's the other weird plot hole. Not a plot hole, but just like a thing that the script doesn't bother explaining in this movie. So he's a scientist, but he seems to have no scientific interest in why is there a moving carnivorous tree whose sap can cure death that can only be satiated with the feeding it virginal young, well, maybe not virginal, but young human women who can be put into a trance by this guy over here playing the bongos. None of that is explained. It's basically the tree might as well be magic, and then he's just sort of extracting its goo to make a science brew with it. But
any equipment he has are just the test tube, so it might as well be alchemy.
Yeah, he's doing chemistry, but the tree is magic.
I mean, there are carnivorous plants out there.
Sure. But
we don't dig into why only one gender of a species.
Yeah, he doesn't question any of the native superstition stuff. He's just yeah, that's how it works, and takes it with him wholesale, right?
That's his racism showing.
Or not that's very respectful of native beliefs to just be oh, you say it's a god that we need to feed women to? Cool, I'll take that as read. No. Okay, but so horror movie because of that. There's a monster tree in the basement.
Yeah, and I think because of the way it brings in the exploitation elements and the way that it uses those kind of exploitation tropes to enhance what it's trying to do as horror, kind of helps solidify its footing here.
Yeah, and then there's the score to the movie, which is just someone sort of improvising on a piano, but they're not allowed to go above middle C.
Yeah, this score is actually pretty good. I did enjoy it. I do love the theremin singer, very reminiscent of Star Trek, and I love original series scoring.
Yeah,
so super into this score.
Yeah, there's a woman who's a vocalist. Honestly, it's kind of like dementia. Where she's just wordless, but it sounds like they're trying. It's they couldn't afford a theremin. So they're we need you to sound like a theremin. And she was all right, got it. Anyways, yes, I think this is horror. I just think it's bad.
Yeah, same. So where were you looking then?
I had a hard time figuring out how bad this is. That can sometimes be a trouble. But the movie that, for whatever reason, this felt most akin to me was The Spider-Woman Strikes Back, which is way down at 193. I think just the
Weren't those plants carnivorous as well? Because she does have plants in the basement.
Yes, there's carnivorous plants that she's feeding people to in order to get, I think, something from. Maybe it's youth potion or something.
Yeah.
And she's this weird old lady in this house.
She's middle-aged, Ben.
She's Gail Sondergaard. And there's a young woman who comes to work for her and gets caught up in it. So that movie felt very similar to me. This feels about as good as that. That movie had Universal Studios and Gail Sondergaard and Rondo Hatton, and then just didn't really do anything with any of them. Also has a bad ending. Right above that is The Mad Ghoul, which is not a great movie either. But above that is Crime of Dr. Crespi, which is bad, but it's got Dwight Fry and Erich von Stroheim in it. So I think this is worse than Crime of Dr. Crespi. And then working down from there, we've got a lot of junk. But at 197, there's Mesa of Lost Women, which is not a functional movie in the way that this is at least a functional movie. So my range is 192 to 197.
So when I was first ranking, I first thought of comparing this to The She Creature.
Okay.
And I think it's probably just because of like woman-eater, she-creature. Okay. I don't know. And I was like, yeah, no, we're going below. And then I kind of landed around 169 Voodoo Island because it also had carnivorous plants. Mm-hmm. And as terribly made as it is, I think it's kind of a better made movie. A lot of it is on location and the plants were done better. Mm-hmm. So I kind of continued looking down. And then I kind of got into the range where you are, but I settled around 177 with Iban Gisheng. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay, that movie's really well done, even though it's like not the best made movie, and its makeup is really good. Mm-hmm. So I knew that Woman-Eater would go below that. And then below that is Bride of the Gorilla, which I remember us critiquing for it being so misogynist as well. So I kind of was like, all right, let's see what Ben has to say about comparing Woman-Eater with Bride of the Gorilla. So I made that my ceiling. Looking down, kind of stopped at The Monster Maker at 181 because that movie is also structured very strangely. That one has the random ape and the dog, as well as the
the acromegaly guy.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I made that my floor. So my range is pretty narrow, 178 to 181. That is above where you were looking.
If we look between our ranges, that's a difference of 10 films, 181 to 191, basically. So the mid-range there is like La Llorona, The Monster, The Catman of Paris. I think the reason why I ended up lower was because like I was kind of looking at all these movies as well. Mm-hmm. But like La Llorona is bad and a mess, but like it's culturally interesting and has like an interesting point of view and has something to say about colonialism. The Monster, mostly a comedy, but it's got Lon Chaney and it establishes a lot of like old dark house genre tropes. 3 Cases of Murder.
This is probably scarier as like a British movie.
Yeah, this British movie at least is not like, it's at least trying to like be a little taboo and stuff in a way that 3 Cases of Murder like just did not have the balls for.
Well, I am going to suggest below The Monster and above 3 Cases of Murder. The reason below The Monster is that movie, like, to be fair, it's silent, mm-hmm. but there was a lot of really interesting camera stuff going on, and they, had the tradition of doing those kinds of shots and camera techniques in that movie. It wasn't innovative in that way, but compared to this movie, I feel like a lot of those shots and angles were more exciting.
Well, yeah, like at least Roland West, like it always felt like he was trying to make a good movie and trying to make his current movie better than the last movie he made, and was like into the idea of his movies looking good and being better than other people's. So yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you. I think 3 Cases of Murder is probably like better made.
Yeah.
But it's not horror enough because it's like so polite. So yeah, okay, let's do that. Coming into the list at the new number 188 is Woman-Eater from 1958, directed by Charles Saunders.
If you would like to see this list, you can go to our website, screamscenepodcast.tumblr.com. There you can find links to the other episodes that we have mentioned today, as well as our appeals box. If you would like to contest this or any other ranking, you can drop us a line through our Ask Box on Tumblr. You can reach out over email at screamscenepodcast@gmail.com or talk to us on Twitter @_screamscene.
Scream Scene updates every Wednesday on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, and Spotify. You can help the show out by leaving us a rating or a review, subscribe to the show using our RSS feed, and talk to your friends about the show. And if you have the means, you can help the show out financially by heading over to patreon.com/screamscenepodcast, where you can become a patron of the night for as little as $1 a month. Patrons at the $5 and $10 levels get access to regular bonus content. $10 patrons just got access to a piece by Sarah comparing Twilight and Wuthering Heights. And I know you guys all want to get in on that. So check it out at patreon.com/ Scream Scene podcast.
There's also the poll for the next horror-adjacent episode that is up. The theme is Silent Nights. So all of the films are silent. And it just so happened that Paul Lenny had 2 films in the running, and they are both leading, with 1928's The Man Who Laughs leading by like 2 votes. So if you would like to put your 2 cents in, you'll have to put your 2 cents into the Patreon in order to vote. So what are we watching next week, Ben?
Next week, Sarah, we are watching an American AIP B-movie with the title The Astounding She-Monster.
Well, this sounds like it'll be an actual monster who's a lady.
Yes.
Not just a creature that only eats ladies.
Correct.
Well, we will see you then, creatures of the night.
Bye.
Bye.